Good morning, students. Welcome back to the video lecture on statistics. And the previous lecture we have discussed about the term sampling, population, then probability sampling, non-probability sampling, etc. We have just mentioned all these things, and about the parameters, statistics, etc. we have mentioned. And let's in this video lecture, let's see about the ethical consideration in the data collection. So it is a researcher's ethical responsibility to safeguard the storyteller by maintaining the purpose of the research, and the relationship should be based on the trust between the researcher and the participant. The inform participant of the purpose of the study. So the data collection can be done by the investigator by keeping on these ethical considerations and being respectful of the research site, reciprocity, using the ethical interview practices, maintaining privacy, and cooperating with the participant. So the reciprocity in the sense that the practice of encouraging through which the others for the mutual benefit. So it is a give and take policy. So you can share your data with your fellow mates, and then you can wisely use the data collected for your research purpose. Then there are the certain checklists for the general ethical issues while sampling is done or the data collection is done. That is a reciprocity, it is a first checklist. Next, it is a assessment of risk. Assessment of risk is the second one. Then there should be a confidentiality. Then it should inform the consent, then the data access and the ownership. So these are the different ethical issues to consider. Then the qualitative researchers must be aware of the potential of their own emotional turmoil in processing this information. And during the interview process, the participants may disclose sensitive and potentially distressing information in the course of the interview. There are certain errors of non-observation, that is a deviation between an estimate from an ideal sample and the true population value is called as a sampling error. Then almost always the sampling frame does not match up perfectly with the target population, leading to the errors of coverage. So these are the two errors of observation, and non-response is probably that the most serious of the errors arise in the three ways, that is inability of a person responding to come up with the answer, refusal to the answer, then inability to contact the sampled elements. So these are the three non-responsive errors that might occur, and these errors can be classified due to the interviewer, respondent instrument, or the method of the data collection. And the interviewer has a direct and diagrammatic effect on the way a person responds to a question. So the most people tend to side with a view apparently favored by the interviewer, especially if they are neutral. And the friendly interviews are more successful. And in general, the interviewers of the same gender, racial, and ethnic group as those being interviewed are slightly more successful. Then about the respondents differ greatly in motivation to answer correctly and inability to do so. Now, obtaining an honest response to the sensitive questions is difficult. So the basic bias occur by the respondents is that the recall bias that simply does not remember, then prestige bias exaggerates to look better, intentional deception, that is a lying, and incorrect measurement does not understand the unit of definition. So these are the respondents' error that might occur. Then the procedures for the data collection, the reliability, validity, and other types of variables used are more important parameters for the statistical studies. And in a scientific research work, the data is collected only from the personal experimental study. That is, a primary data is used, and the primary statistical data can be collected in two ways, that is, a census method and sampling method. There are two methods of data collection, that is a census method, and the second one, it is a sampling method. And now let's see what is a census method. In a census method occurs if the entire population is very small, or it is responsible to include the entire population for other reasons. Then it is also called as a census sample because the data is gathered on a very number of individuals. Then why the sample has to be taken? The population of the interest is usually too large to attempt survey all of its members. So it's very difficult to take each and every individual, or to meet each and every individual to collect the data. So we just randomly select the few individuals, and those individuals are called as a sample. And a carefully chosen sample can be used to represent the population. That is, a sample reflects the characteristic of a population from which it is drawn. So that point is very important. The sample reflects the characteristic of the population from which it is drawn. So that is the importance of sample. The sampling design refers to the procedure that the researcher could follow or adopt in selecting the same sampling units from which the inference about the population is drawn. And the sample design is made up of two elements, that is the sampling method and the estimator. The sampling method refers to the rules and procedures by which the some elements of the population are included in the sample. And some common sampling methods are the simple random sampling, stratified sampling, and clustered sampling. And the estimation process for calculating the sample statistic is called as a estimator. And the different sampling methods may be used by the different estimators. For example, the formula of computing a mean score with a simple random sample is different from the formula of computing a mean score with a stratified sample. And similarly, the formula for the standard error may vary from one sampling method to another sampling method. Then there is sampling error, that is a number that describes the precision of an estimate from any one of those samples, and it is usually expressed as a margin of the error. So the sampling error might occur. Then about the sampling procedure. The sampling procedure comprises of several stages. The first is defining the problem concerned, and the second is specifying a sampling frame, a set of ideas or events possible to measure. Then third sampling procedure is to specify a sampling for selecting the items or events from the frame. Then determining the sample size, that is determining the sample size. Next is implementing the sampling plan, then the sampling and the data collecting, then the reviewing the sample process. So this is the sampling procedure. Once again, defining the problem of concern. The second is to set the items, events possible to measure. The third is a sampling method. Then the fourth, it is a sample size. The fifth, it is the implement of action. Then the sixth, sampling and the data collection. And the last one, it is a reviewing the sampling process. And there are the different types of sampling, which is broadly classified into two. There is a probability sampling and the non-probability sampling. The probability sampling includes the simple random sampling, systemic random sampling, stratified random sampling, multi-stage sampling, multi-phase sampling, and cluster sampling. Whereas the non-probability sampling includes the convenience sampling, purposive sampling, quota sampling, and it also includes accidental sampling, systematic sampling, snowball sampling, saturation sampling, and then sampling. So we'll be seeing the few of this sampling in detail. Then about the probability sampling, the best sampling is a probability sampling because it increases the likelihood of obtaining the samples that are the representative of that particular population. Probability samples are selected in such a way as to be the representative of that particular population, and they provide the most valid or the credible results because they reflect the characteristic of a population from which they are selected. For example, the residents of a particular community, the students of an elementary school, etc. And there are the two types of probability samples, that is the random and the stratified sampling. And the sampling methods that occur us to know in advance how likely it is that any element of a population will be selected for the sample, and that every element has somehow the chance of being selected are termed as a probability sampling method. So there is a probability sampling method. Then the some processes for using in order to make the probability sampling exercise is success is a randomization. It is a technique for ensuring that any member of a population has an equal chance of appearing in a sample. And with randomization, the sample studies or statistics will on average have the same values as the population parameters. And with randomization samples, the statistics will not average have the same values as the population parameters. And when every element in a population does not have the same probability of selection, this is called as a equal probability selection. And such designs are also referred to as a self-weighing because all the sample units are given the same weight. Then there is about the non-probability sampling. It represents a group of sampling techniques that help the researchers to select units from a population that they are interested in studying. Collectively, these units form the samples that the researcher studies. And the non-probability samplings cannot specify the probability that a given sample will be selected. For example, the snowball sampling method. Why we use such methods? It is the often inexpensive and can provide the information about the others that are difficult to sample or require the great thrust or will get lengthy unstructured interviews. And some social variables and their relationship are universal and which make the sampling method irrelevant. There are the certain advantages and the disadvantages of the type of sampling methods. So the advantages of the probability method, it is a less prone to bias. Then calculation of standard error is possible from which one can determine the statistical thickness. And there is a non-probability sampling that is flexible, quicker and cheaper. Judgmentally representative samples referred with a small sample sizes. And there are also the disadvantages that the probability requires the list of all elements, the time consuming is costly, known advantages with the small numbers. Then about the non-probability disadvantages. It's a greater bias risk, not possible. Non-probability test may not be possible to generalize the findings, so that's a disadvantage. Then subjectivity can make it difficult to measure the changes over time, and no way to assess the precision or the reliability of the data. So these are the disadvantages of the non-probability sampling. So that's all in this video lecture. So in this video lecture we have discussed about the different ethical issues regarding the sampling, then about the two different methods of the data collection, that is the probability sampling and the non-probability sampling, and there are the different types of probability sampling and the non-probability sampling we'll be discussing in the coming video lecture. Thank you.